So now we need to talk about what happens with this whole system once puberty strikes. Okay, so how does that happen? Well, around the age of 10 to 12 or 14, depending on whether you are female-bodied or male-bodied, your thermostat is basically going to turn itself way up. So it used to be your hypothalamus was totally fine with really, really low levels of estradiol, which is estrogen, or testosterone, as we can see in the charts below. But then around age 10 in female-bodied people and around age 11, 12, 13 in male-bodied people, the hypothalamus decides it needs to turn up the heat. It's only going to be satisfied with much higher levels of hormone. So it's going to reset its thermostat basically and require higher levels of hormone. So the gonads now really kick into gear at puberty. And there is all of that information for you. And there's the rest of it. It's the increase in hormone levels that then cause the physical changes that we see during puberty, right? Which some people think is pretty magical. All right, so now we need to think, okay, what are the changes that are actually happening during puberty? If we were in class, I would actually ask you to volunteer these things. So take a moment and think about what are the physical body changes that occur during puberty in both male-bodied and female-bodied individuals. I'll stop for a moment and then we'll move on. Okay, so here's the thing. So body hair, we think about male-bodied people becoming hairy, but actually both female and male-bodied people become hairier at puberty, right? Especially the axillary and pubic hair. Axillary is your armpit hair. And then male-bodied people, they're also going to develop facial hair. In terms of the skin, right, everybody's skin starts getting a bit oilier, you get more acne, you get more body odor. That happens in both male and female-bodied people. In male-bodied people, the skin also gets a bit thicker. So sometimes, female-bodied people are described as having very soft skin. That's because it's thinner. In terms of the skeleton, in terms of your bones, they're going to grow. In girls, as they enter puberty, they have a quick growth spurt that's quickly followed by a leveling off. And because of that, estrogen seems to fuse the growth plates in the bones really quickly. Females in general are shorter than males. The estrogen is also going to cause the pelvic girdle, right, the pelvis, the hips, to widen. In male-bodied people, the skeleton not only grows significantly for several years after puberty, but it also becomes thicker and more dense. So male-bodied people usually have higher bone density than female-bodied people. In terms of the voice, a lot of the times people in the class will say, well, in girls, their voice goes up at puberty because we tend to assume that estrogen makes your voice go up. That's not actually true. In both male and female-bodied people, the vocal cords lengthen and the voice is lower. That's why if you hear somebody on the phone or you hear a recording of a voice, a child's voice is very distinctive because a child's voice is always very high. It's higher than that of an adult female or an adult male. But we'll see significant and pronounced slurring of the voice in people whose bodies make testosterone. And as those vocal cords lengthen, that's also going to cause that prominence and that increase in size of the larynx or the Adam's apple. Fat deposition is going to increase when puberty happens, especially in female-bodied people and especially in areas that estrogen tells it to go, so the breasts, the hips, and the buttocks. In male-bodied people, at the beginning of puberty, you get increased fat deposition. So it's kind of, a lot of boys get a little bit of a pudge right before they get their growth spurt in puberty. But then it decreases significantly thereafter in most folks. In terms of breast tissue, that's going to enlarge and the ductal system is going to begin to mature under the influence of estrogen. But in those who make testosterone, that will not occur. In terms of muscular development, muscles will strengthen and enlarge and the shoulders will broaden in people whose bodies make testosterone, but not in people who make estrogen. In terms of the genitals, the external genitalia, we're going to see enlargement of all of the external genitalia in response to estrogen or testosterone. And the reproductive organs themselves, the internal ones, are going to become functional. So in female-bodied people, we're going to start to see ovulation or the release of eggs or ova from the ovaries and subsequent menstruation. Girls are going to get their period. In males, you begin to get the creation of sperm as well as other fluids from the male reproductive glands, and ejaculation becomes possible, hence the first wet dream. We have ways of staging puberty to kind of grade where someone is at in their physical development. I don't expect you to know these. This is just for you to know that there is a grading system for clinicians to use when they're assessing if someone is going through puberty at the appropriate time. So when does it happen? Well, as we saw from the charts earlier, average age is around 10 to 13, but it can be as early as 8 or as late as 16. Female-bodied people in general enter and complete puberty at a younger age than male-bodied people. So here we have the picture, classic scenario at a middle school dance. The girls are taller than the boys. The girls look like they could be 18 and the boys all look like they're 10, right? So we often see that huge disparity in terms of pubertal development happening much earlier in girl-bodied people than in male-bodied people. There's lots of individual variation, however. So stress can absolutely halt puberty or delay it, right? If your body is under stress due to illness or just significant trauma in your life, then your body will hold off a bit on puberty. Nutrition can play a role. In terms of being undernourished will delay puberty. Being overnourished seems to be associated with an earlier puberty. Also, day length, climate, the amount of social interaction you have, particularly with those of the opposite sex, and genetics all seem to play a role. So this varies a lot, even though there are averages. Another interesting thing about timing of puberty is that as we look at the age of menarche, so menarche, as you can see on the left there, menarche, is the age at which a girl gets her first period. We use that data point a lot because it's much easier for a female-bodied individual to tell you when they first got their period than it is for them to tell you, well, I was at Tanner stage 3 when I was at 9 and I got breast buds, right? So getting your first period is kind of a big event. A lot of people know when it occurred. It's relatively easy to measure and there isn't a lot of subjectivity there. So we actually have data going back for more than 100 years, looking at the average age of menarche or beginning of menstruation in girls over time. And there's been this steady decrease in age. You can see it used to be around 16 or so, and now we're actually down into the 12s. So if you look at this data, it's 1990 to 2010, right? First period, menarche, is coming earlier and earlier in girls. So now we're down to just over 12 years old on average. So this begs the question, why? Why are girls getting their periods earlier? It could be just that we are better nourished human beings than at any time we have ever been in history, on average, as a group. Very fewer people now go hungry than used to, even 50 years ago, let alone 100, 150, or 200 years ago. So in general, we are better nourished, certainly from the standpoint of calories. And actually, when you look in terms of both macronutrients and micronutrients, vitamins and minerals, we are overall better nourished than any human beings have ever been throughout history. Now, a lot of people say, oh, it's because we eat junk food and junk food is bad for us. And people tend to think that we are worse nourished than throughout history. And certainly we're eating some things that aren't good for us, but in terms of meeting our nutritional needs, we're actually doing pretty well. So it could just be that we're really well nourished. So our bodies are like, hey, everything's in place. Let's go ahead, become reproductively mature so that we can reproduce and have babies and perpetuate the species. So it could just be a marker of health, but it could actually be some other things as well, such as pesticides and plastics. And so now we're going to take a little bit of detour from today's main topic to talk about